The storm system that was already making headlines just escalated, and the reason it got worse is the same reason it's going to keep going for days. What you're watching right now isn't a random spike in severe weather. It's the predictable violent result of an atmosphere that spent weeks building pressure under a massive heat dome, and that dome just started collapsing. When that happens, it doesn't break quietly. It breaks with storms, and the ones already moving through the central and eastern United States this week have already crossed the threshold from dangerous to historic. Let's start with what just happened, because the last 72 hours alone tell you exactly where this is heading. Since the 1st of July, there have been over 2,000 reports of severe weather stretching from the plains all the way to the Atlantic coast. Nearly 1,000 of those came in on a single day, the 4th of July, while millions of people were outside for Independence Day celebrations. Fireworks were canceled or rescheduled in Hartford, Connecticut. Parades were called off in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. Boston evacuated spectators at its major outdoor event before eventually resuming. 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts ripped through New Jersey. Hundreds of trees came down. NJ Transit suspended service. And that was before the worst of the flooding even arrived. If you think that's where the story ends, it doesn't. So hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what comes next is something a lot of people aren't seeing yet. The heat dome itself set every condition for this moment. For most of the past week, more than 250 million people across the central and eastern United States were trapped under dangerous heat. LaGuardia Airport in New York hit 104 degrees Fahrenheit, its highest temperature since 2012. Washington, D.C. set an all-time record for its warmest overnight low, with temperatures staying above 84 degrees after midnight. Philadelphia, Boston, and Baltimore all reached triple digits on the same day. Atlantic City, New Jersey, hit 106 degrees on the 4th of July, a record that broke everything the city had ever measured. In New Jersey alone, officials are now investigating at least 29 deaths from the previous week that are suspected to be heat-related, with victims found on streets and in homes without air conditioning, ranging in age from their 30s to their 80s. Heat domes are inherently unstable. They can hold for days, sometimes weeks, but the atmospheric mechanics that keep them locked in place eventually weaken. When a dome starts to break down, the process is not gradual. The cold, dry air pushing in from the edges of the dome collides violently with the superheated, moisture-saturated air that's been trapped underneath it. That collision is where the storms come from. Meteorologists call the perimeter of this interaction the ring of fire, and it's exactly what's been erupting across the country over the last several days. The dome collapses, the edges ignite, and the storms produced in that collision zone carry everything the overheated atmosphere has been storing for days: enormous moisture, loads, intense instability, and enough energy to produce damaging winds, large hail, and catastrophic flash flooding all in the same system. That's precisely what happened in the Northeast over the weekend. Severe storms tracked from Michigan all the way to the East Coast as the heat dome began to weaken. Flash flood warnings went out for parts of New York City, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. Highways across northern New Jersey were flooded, stranding cars. Part of the roof of a warehouse store in Ocean Township collapsed under the weight of the rain, sending water, a shopping cart, and tables of merchandise skidding across the floor. 2 people were briefly trapped in the debris before managing to escape. Hospitals reported flooding. Basement apartment residents in New York City were told by the mayor to leave immediately if they saw water rising. And when the storms moved through, they left nearly 450,000 people without power, with crews being mobilized from 12 states and Canada to assist with restoration. Here's the part of this story that most coverage glosses over, and it's the part that explains why the storm threat this week is actually more complicated than it looks on a radar map. The heat dome hasn't fully collapsed. It has weakened and shifted, but it's now reforming across the west, where temperatures will continue to climb through mid-July. What that means for the central and eastern United States is a specific meteorological dynamic that forecasters are watching very carefully. The leftover warmth and moisture from the eastern heat dome doesn't simply vanish. It feeds directly into the storm systems that are forming along the boundary where the 2 air masses meet. Through at least Tuesday and Wednesday, severe thunderstorm risk remains active across nearly a dozen states from Texas to Wisconsin. The same Gulf moisture that fueled the heat is now fueling the storms, and with the jet stream still in a position that slows the progression of these systems eastward, storms are sitting over the same communities for longer than they normally would. Flash flooding is the threat that keeps rising as this pattern continues, and it's historically the deadliest component of severe weather events that people underestimate the most. People flee tornadoes. They don't always flee rising water in the dark or a road that looks passable but isn't. A foot of moving water at just 6 miles per hour is enough to float a car. 2 feet can sweep a person off their feet in seconds. When storms stall over already saturated ground and drop another 3 to 5 inches of rain in a 2-hour window, drainage systems fail, rivers jump their banks, and the flooding that results looks nothing like a slow-moving river scene. It looks like a street becoming a channel in 15 minutes. That is what multiple communities in the Northeast are facing right now as the second wave of storms pushes through. The broader seasonal picture adds another layer to understanding what's next, because this outbreak doesn't exist in isolation. The 2026 Atlantic hurricane season officially got its first named storm in mid-June when Tropical Rainstorm Arthur made landfall in Texas, dumping up to 8 to 12 inches of rain across a broad swath from eastern Louisiana to eastern Alabama. The rivers that drained that event, including the Sabine, Calcasieu, Pearl, and Tombigbee, are still elevated. When the next significant moisture event arrives from the Gulf, those river systems have less capacity to absorb it before reaching flood stage. Meanwhile, the warming Gulf waters that produced Arthur, and that have been feeding moisture into every storm system crossing the central United States since spring, are running well above average temperatures. Warm Gulf water is atmospheric fuel. It increases the moisture content of air masses moving north, intensifies rainfall rates in storms that tap into it, and supports the formation of tropical systems that can compound the damage already underway on land before a storm even makes landfall. And here's the atmospheric signal that makes the second half of summer something every person in the storm zone should be paying attention to. Super El Niño is now breaking into the atmosphere. The tropical Pacific has been transitioning from La Niña conditions toward El Niño over the last several months, and as of late June and early July, meteorologists are seeing the influence of that shift starting to appear in the large-scale atmospheric patterns over North America. El Niño tends to strengthen and shift the subtropical jet stream, which changes where storm tracks develop and how often the jet stream buckles into the kind of blocking patterns that stall weather systems in place. The transition period between La Niña and El Niño, which is exactly where the atmosphere sits right now, is historically one of the most volatile phases of any seasonal pattern. It's the period when the atmosphere is most likely to produce outbreak events in unexpected locations, sustain systems for longer than the models initially suggest, and shift active zones from one region to another with relatively little notice. What specifically comes next in the near term is a storm threat that continues to drift south and west through the rest of the week, concentrated on the edges of where the heat dome rebuilds in the west. AccuWeather meteorologists have flagged an area from near Pittsburgh to Virginia Beach on the east. Coast for additional severe weather on Monday, with the threat shifting closer to the Atlantic coast by Tuesday, where the main risks are localized damaging wind gusts and intense rainfall. Across the high plains, a separate cluster of storm activity from Colorado and New Mexico through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas is being driven by the same dynamic, with wind gust potential up to 85 miles per hour in the most intense cells. The storm activity won't be as widespread as what the 4th of July weekend produced, but it will be persistent. It will be spread across enough states to affect millions of people simultaneously, and it will be dropping rain onto ground that, in many areas, has already received more precipitation in the last 2 weeks than it typically sees in a month. There is also a question sitting beneath all of this that deserves a direct answer, which is whether the warning system tracking and alerting you to these events is operating the way it should be. The National Weather Service has been rebuilding its staffing after losing over 1,000 experienced meteorologists and support staff to budget cuts and buyouts in 2025. While new hires have been added, the agency still has hundreds fewer staff than it had before the cuts. Multiple tornado outbreaks earlier this year were caught by surprise, including one in April near Kansas City, where the afternoon forecast showed no tornado risk hours before. 5 tornadoes touched down. The morning weather balloon launches that would have revealed the atmospheric profile needed to make the forecast more accurate hadn't been completed. An investigation was launched. Congress sent letters. Months later, the answers are still incomplete. What isn't? Incomplete is the fact that the busiest severe weather period of the year is unfolding right now with a system that is thinner than it has been in modern memory. The practical question is what you do with all of this information. The first answer is to stop relying exclusively on your phone's weather app during active storm events, APA. Notifications can be delayed by minutes during high traffic periods when millions of devices are pinging the same server simultaneously. A dedicated battery-powered no AA weather radio gives you direct alerts that don't depend on cell towers or internet connectivity, both of which can fail at exactly the moment severe weather arrives. The second answer is to take flash flood warnings with the same urgency you would give a tornado warning, because statistically, water kills more people per year than tornadoes do in the United States. The third is to have your shelter location decided before the watch is issued, not during it, because making a clear decision under pressure with storm noise in the background and alerts going off is harder than it sounds. The 2026 severe weather season has already produced the second largest single-day tornado count in American history, the the first EF5 tornado in 13 years, over 1,100 preliminary tornado reports through late June, and a heat dome that just broke over the most densely populated corridor in the country, with enough stored energy to generate storms that haven't finished moving through yet. The outbreak didn't peak and end, it evolved. The heat phase became the storm phase. The storm phase is now becoming the flooding phase, and the flooding phase is overlapping with the early weeks of an Atlantic hurricane season operating over Gulf waters that are running well above the temperatures that historically produce the most active storm years on record. That is the full picture of what's next, and the people who understand that picture will be the ones making better decisions when the next warning goes out. One more thing worth knowing before you close out of this. The storm totals being reported right now are preliminary. They always are in the immediate aftermath. When the National Weather Service survey teams finish their ground assessments in the days and weeks ahead, tornado counts almost always get revised upward. Damage ratings frequently get bumped higher as crews find destruction that aerial surveys missed, and the full scope of what a season has produced only becomes clear after the season itself has passed. The preliminary number of over 2,000 severe weather reports in the first days of July alone is already significant by any historical measure. When the confirmed figures come in, they will almost certainly be worse than what the initial tallies suggest. That is not speculation. That is how the process has worked in every major outbreak year on record, and 2026 has already given every indication that it belongs in that category. The cities and communities rebuilding right now, from flooded streets, downed trees, and collapsed rooftops, are not outliers in an otherwise calm season. They are the current front line of a severe weather pattern that has been escalating since March, that is being fed by record warm ocean temperatures, amplified by an ENSO transition that is still playing out, and tracked by a warning agency that is operating at reduced capacity during the period it needs the most from its experienced staff. Every one of those factors compounds the others. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, which makes rainfall systems stationary for longer, which concentrates that rainfall in smaller areas. A thinner forecasting workforce means some of those systems arrive with less warning than they should. And a public that doesn't fully understand why this year feels different from the severe weather seasons of the past is less prepared than it needs to be. Staying informed, staying connected to real-time alerts, and understanding what's actually driving these events is not optional when the season you're living through is writing new records almost every week.